Jack Morrison, a billionaire with everything anyone could dream of, decided to hide his wealth for a year to see if anyone could love him for who he truly was. But what he didn't expect was to fall deeply in love with Emma, a woman who was completely unaware of his identity. As their connection grew stronger, Jack's secret became a heavy burden, and the lie he built to test her began to unravel. What happens when the truth comes out? Will Emma forgive him, or has he lost everything that truly mattered? But before we dive deeper into the story, let me know where you're watching this from in the comments below. And if you love this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any future tales. Jack Morrison was not your typical 35-year-old billionaire. Behind the gleaming wheels of his Lamborghini, surrounded by mansions and luxury that many could only dream of, he felt an emptiness that money couldn't fill. As he sped through the streets, the roar of the engine barely masked the growing void inside him. No matter how many cars, how many houses, something's missing, he thought, gripping the steering wheel with a resolve that felt all too familiar. He was tired of women who saw him as nothing more than a paycheck, tired of a life where love was always a transaction. In a moment of intense self-reflection, Jack knew he had to escape the relentless spotlight, to find something real, something genuine. "I need to find true love," he whispered to himself, his words swallowed by the roar of the city around him. It was a decision that would change everything. Back in his sleek office, Sarah, his ever-diligent assistant, interrupted his thoughts with a sense of urgency. "Mr. Morrison, you have a video call with the Tokyo investors in 15 minutes. But Jack was already lost in a different world, one far removed from board meetings and profit margins. He turned to Sarah, his voice low but steady. "I need you to set up an emergency meeting. I have an important announcement to make." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she nodded, sensing the shift in the air. Something was about to change, and for the first time in years, Jack felt a flicker of hope, perhaps. Just perhaps. This decision would lead him to the love he'd been searching for all along. The walls of his empire, built on success and isolation, would soon be tested in ways he couldn't yet understand. As Jack stood before the board, his usual confidence was replaced with an air of determination that hung heavily in the room. The members of the board, usually the ones calling the shots, sat in stunned silence. He could feel their eyes on him, each one waiting for the familiar, calculated decisions they had come to expect. But today, Jack Morrison had a different announcement to make. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've made a decision that will change our lives. I'm disappearing. For the next year, I will live as a mechanic in a small town." His words were deliberate, almost surreal in the gravity they carried. The room fell into a brief silence before Michael Carter, the vice president, broke it, his tone incredulous. "What could you possibly do, Jack? You're one of the most famous men in the country. You can't just walk away from everything." Jack didn't flinch, his gaze unwavering as he met Michael's eyes. "I have a plan," he said, his voice steady, laced with an emotion that was foreign to the board members. "I want to know if someone can love me for who I am, not for the fortune I've built." The air seemed to thicken as Jack's words hung in the balance. The board members exchanged looks, their minds racing, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what Jack was suggesting. This wasn't just a business move. It was something far more personal, something that challenged everything they knew about him. For a moment, the world outside the boardroom ceased to exist. Jack's decision was about to ripple through his life in ways even he couldn't predict. Would it bring the answers he sought, or would it unravel him entirely? The future seemed uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Jack was willing to take that risk. Jack packed a simple suitcase, filled with only the essentials, and with a deep breath he left behind the life of luxury that had defined him for so long. He was no longer Jack Morrison, the billionaire. From this moment on, he would be Jake Miller, a man with no past, no fortune, and no reputation. He climbed into a weathered Chevy, its faded paint a stark contrast to the sleek, high-end vehicles he had once driven. As he sped down the highway, the world he knew slipped further and further behind him. "This is the only way, Tom. I need to see if someone can love me for who I really am." Jack's voice crackled through the phone as he spoke to his old friend. "I've got your back always, my friend. I'll protect your company while you're gone," Tom replied, his tone filled with unwavering support. Despite the uncertainty of Jack's decision, Tom stood by him, knowing this was something Jack had to do for himself. An hours later, Jack arrived in Oakridge, a quaint little town that seemed frozen in time. The houses were small but charming, with white picket fences and flower beds lining the streets. It was a far cry from the cold, towering skyscrapers of the city. Oakridge was a place where people knew each other by name, and strangers were met with cautious curiosity. It was the perfect place for Jack to disappear. He made his way to a local auto repair shop where the sound of wrenches clanking and engines revving filled the air. Here he would work as a mechanic, far removed from the world of boardrooms and private jets. His new life as Jake Miller had begun, and for the first time in a long time, Jack felt the weight of freedom and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Would Oakridge offer him the answers he was searching for, or would it be another chapter in his search for something real? Time would tell. It was a quiet afternoon in Oakridge when Jake Miller's routine took an unexpected turn. He was heading to the local diner for a late lunch when he saw a familiar sight. A truck pulled over to the side of the road, its hood raised, smoke rising from the engine. Jake slowed down, instinctively pulling over to offer help. As he stepped out of his Chevy, he noticed the woman standing next to the truck, her hands on her hips, frustration clear on her face. "Need some help?" Jake called out, his voice warm but cautious. She looked up, her expression softening as she saw him. "Oh, thank goodness. My name's Emma Thompson. I'm a teacher at the elementary school here. My truck just broke down and I don't know what to do." Jake smiled, taking a step closer. "Well, you've come to the right place. I've got a bit of experience with engines. Let me take a look." As he got to work, Emma stood by, chatting idly with him. In the midst of their conversation, something unexpected happened. They began to connect. Both had experienced deep loss, though in very different ways. For Emma, it was the loss of her mother a few years ago, a pain that still lingered. For Jake, it was the isolation he had felt despite having everything. They shared these stories, both finding comfort in the understanding of someone who truly listened. "True love?" Emma asked, her voice thoughtful. "I used to believe in it, but I think it only exists in fairy tales." Jake paused, wiping his hands on a rag, a faint smile crossing his face. "Maybe we need to believe in it more than that," he replied softly, looking into her eyes. There was an immediate connection, a spark neither of them could ignore. Jake couldn't help but be drawn to her. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her strength and vulnerability that captivated him. He hadn't expected this small town, this simple life, to offer anything so real. Yet, standing there with Emma, he felt as if he had stumbled upon something far more meaningful than he had ever imagined. Over the next few days, Jake found himself looking for reasons to cross paths with her again. He'd stop by the school, pretending to drop by for a quick chat or to help her with her truck. Each encounter felt more natural, and Emma began to notice that Jake was different from anyone she had ever met. There was something unspoken between them, a quiet understanding, a shared bond that was beginning to grow. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was no denying that Jake Miller was becoming more than just the guy who fixed her truck. As the days went by, Jake and Emma continued to spend more time together. It was a quiet evening when they found themselves sitting on the porch of Emma's modest home, the soft glow of the setting sun casting long shadows. They were sipping coffee, the silence between them comfortable, but there was something unspoken, something Emma had been carrying for a long time. Finally, she broke the silence. "I came here to start over," she began, her voice almost a whisper. "I thought Oakridge would be a fresh start, away from the chaos of my past, but I'm not sure if starting over is even enough anymore." She paused, looking out into the distance, her gaze distant and filled with sorrow. "I've been disappointed by love so many times. Each time, I thought it was real, but in the end, I was left heartbroken. Now, I wonder if true love even exists." Jake watched her closely, his heart aching at the raw vulnerability in her voice. "I know how you feel," he said quietly. "I've been through my share of disappointments too, but maybe we just need to believe in it more. Maybe love is something we have to choose, even when it seems impossible." Emma looked at him, her eyes searching as if trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. There was a tenderness in Jake's gaze that made her feel understood, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Maybe you're right," she said softly, a faint smile forming on her lips. "Maybe we just need to believe." In that moment, something shifted between them. It was as if the weight of the past lifted, if only for a brief moment, replaced by the possibility of something new. The road ahead was still uncertain, but in each other's presence, they had found a flicker of hope that they had both long been missing. As the weeks passed, Jake and Emma grew closer with every shared moment. Their connection deepened as they spent more time together, enjoying the simplicity of Oakridge and the quiet comfort of each other's company. One evening, they attended a local fair, something that had always seemed too small town to interest Emma. But this time, as they wandered through the booths and games, she felt an unexpected warmth. "I always thought this place was so dull," Emma admitted, her voice tinged with amusement as they walked past a row of brightly colored tents. "But now, I don't know, there's something magical about it." She turned to Jake, her eyes shining with the glow of the lights and the joy of the moment. Jake smiled, his heart racing as he looked at her. "Maybe the magic isn't in the place," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "Maybe it's in the people we meet." They paused by a Ferris wheel, the lights twinkling like stars in the night sky, and in that moment Jake leaned in slowly, closing the distance between them. Emma's breath caught in her throat as he kissed her gently, the world around them fading away. It was their first kiss, a kiss that felt like the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both had secretly longed for. As the evening continued, their connection deepened even further. But despite the growing feelings between them, Jake was torn. He had spent so long living a lie, hiding behind the mask of Jake Miller the mechanic, and now, with Emma, he found himself falling for her more than he had ever anticipated. His feelings were real, stronger than anything he had felt in a long time. But he couldn't shake the guilt that tugged at him. How could he tell Emma the truth? How could he reveal who he really was without shattering the trust they had built? The conflict inside him was growing, and with every passing moment it became harder to ignore. He was falling for her, but could he keep up the charade for much longer? Tom had always been a man who thrived on control, and when he discovered Emma's past, a new plan began to form in his mind. Late one evening, while rummaging through old files at the office, Tom stumbled upon a photograph of Emma at a charity event. The elegance of the event contrasted sharply with the rugged reality of Oakridge, and as he studied the image, his eyes narrowed. In the background, a familiar face appeared, Emma's father, a once powerful businessman who had lost everything in a devastating financial collapse. "This will be interesting," Tom muttered to himself, a wicked grin curling on his lips. "Let's see what Jake will do when he finds out about this." He knew the perfect way to use Emma's history to shake Jake's world. If there was one thing Tom understood, it was that people's pasts had a way of catching up with them. And Jake was too far gone, wrapped up in a lie of his own creation. Now, it was time to stir the pot. The next day, Tom made the decision to visit Oakridge. He knew that Jake had been getting deeper into his relationship with Emma, and he was determined to disrupt it. As he drove into the small town, he couldn't help but smirk. It was almost too easy. When Tom arrived at Jake's place, he found his friend tinkering with the engine of a truck outside his modest home. Jake looked up as the sound of the engine ceased. Tom stood there, leaning against his car, a casual smile on his face. "You look different here," Tom remarked with a slight chuckle, eyeing Jake's rugged clothes and the simple, small-town life he had embraced. "Just thought I'd swing by and visit my billionaire friend, see how the other half lives." Jake's face tensed at the sight of Tom. He had been hoping for a quiet life away from the chaos of his former world. But Tom's presence was a reminder that the past always had a way of catching up. He wiped his hands on a rag, his brow furrowed with unease. But this wasn't Tom's abysmus. "What are you doing here, Tom?" Jake asked, his voice a little sharper than usual. His stomach twisted at the thought of what Tom might have discovered. There was no way Tom could have figured out his secret, could there? Tom's smile widened as he strolled toward Jake, his steps deliberate and slow. "Oh, just wanted to check in on my old buddy. I've heard things about you, about her." He let the words hang in the air like a threat, each syllable deliberate. Jake felt his heart rate spike, the tension in the air growing thick. "What are you talking about?" Jake's voice was low now, the unease turning into something darker, something more dangerous. Tom leaned against the hood of Jake's car, his gaze unwavering. "You think I don't know who Emma really is? You think I don't know she's the daughter of that failed tycoon, the one who lost it all?" Tom's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as Jake's face went pale. "Yeah, I know everything, and I'm sure you'll want to tell her who you really are before things get out of hand." Jake felt the floor drop out beneath him. He could feel the blood rushing to his ears, his hands shaking. "You wouldn't dare," he whispered, trying to steady himself. You can't. She doesn't deserve that." Tom raised an eyebrow, his tone laced with amusement. "You're right, she doesn't deserve it. But you, well, you might not have a choice in the matter anymore, and who knows? Maybe telling her the truth will be the best thing for both of you, or maybe I'll just let her figure it out on her own." The weight of Tom's words settled over Jake like a suffocating cloud. He had been living in a lie for so long, trying to carve out a life that felt real, and now everything was at risk. He couldn't let Emma know the truth like this, not because of Tom's manipulation. She deserved better. But what could he do now? How could he keep his secret from unraveling? "What do you want, Tom?" Jake asked, his voice steady but his insides churning. Tom's grin deepened and he stood up straight. "I want you to think, Jake. Think about what you're willing to lose and how much you've already lost. We all have our secrets, but sometimes the truth is more dangerous than the lie." With that, Tom turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the quiet of Oakridge. Jake stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of his past crushing him, the uncertainty of what to do next gnawing at him. The lie he had been living was on the verge of being exposed, and the woman he had come to care for was at the center of it all. What would he choose? Would he continue hiding behind the mask, or would he risk everything to come clean? As Tom's car disappeared down the road, Jake was left standing in the middle of the life he had tried so hard to escape. But now, it seemed there was no running from the truth. As the days went by, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Jake. His behavior, once open and easy, had become more distant, and she noticed the tension in his eyes whenever they spoke. He was always there for her, but there was an emotional barrier now, one that she couldn't quite figure out. She had seen this before, people hiding their true selves, carrying secrets they couldn't share, and it was starting to wear on her. One evening, as they sat in the local diner, Emma couldn't hold back her growing suspicions any longer. The casual chatter between them had fizzled, and in the heavy silence, she decided to confront him. "Jake, there's something you're not telling me," she said, her voice firm but gentle. Her eyes locked with his, trying to find the truth hidden behind his guarded expression. "What happened before you came here? Why do you keep pushing me away whenever I ask?" Jake's heart sank at her words. He had been avoiding this moment, the moment when she would finally see through the facade he had built. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup, and for a moment, he couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. He had told himself he could keep the truth hidden, But now, under Emma's unwavering look, the lie was no longer sustainable. "It's complicated, Emma," he replied, his voice laced with uncertainty. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I'm not sure I want to drag you into this. It's not just my past, it's everything, and I'm afraid it'll change the way you see me." Emma's heart raced at his words. There it was again. The distance, the hesitation. Something from his past was holding him back, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. But what could it be? She didn't know yet, but she was determined to find out. Tom sat across from Robert, Emma's father, in a well-appointed office downtown. He had been plotting this moment for days, knowing that if he pushed the right buttons, the truth about Jake would come out. Robert, a man who had once been in the world of high finance, listened carefully as Tom spoke, his face slowly hardening with disbelief. "You need to know the truth, Robert," Tom began, leaning forward with a glint in his eyes. "Your daughter is being deceived by this man." Robert's brow furrowed, his voice rising with anger. "What are you talking about? Deceived? How? Who's deceiving my daughter?" Tom took a slow breath, his next words carefully chosen. "Jake Miller, he's not who he says he is. He's been manipulating the stock market for years to hide his real wealth. He's actually Jack Morrison, one of the richest men in the country. Everything about him, his persona, his new life in Oakridge, is a lie." The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Robert's face went pale, and for a long moment he said nothing, processing the shocking revelation. Tom watched as Robert's emotions shifted from disbelief to anger. The idea that someone could deceive his daughter in such a cruel, calculated way was almost too much to bear. "This is impossible," Robert muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're saying Jake Miller is really Jack Morrison?" Tom nodded, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Yes. And it's not just about his wealth. He's been hiding behind this false identity to get close to your daughter. He's been playing games with her emotions, pretending to be someone he's not. And you know what? I think he has no intention of telling her the truth. She's just another pawn in his twisted game." Robert stood up suddenly, his fists clenched in anger. "I'll confront him. I'll make sure he never hurts my daughter again." With that, he stormed out, heading straight to Oakridge to find Emma and Jake. Meanwhile, in Oakridge, Emma was still grappling with the confusion and pain she felt from Jake's distance. She had been trying to make sense of it all, but nothing made sense anymore. Something about Jake wasn't right, and she could feel it in her bones. The image of him as a simple mechanic was slowly unraveling, and she couldn't ignore the growing feeling of betrayal. She found Jake in the garage, his hands still greasy from working on a car. He looked up as she entered, his face softening for a moment, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Emma walked up to him, her voice firm but filled with hurt. "I need you to tell me everything, Jake," she said, her tone wavering just slightly. "Who are you really? What's the truth?" Jake froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He had known this moment would come, but he had hoped for more time. He had thought he could protect her, shield her from the truth. But now, there was no running. His world was about to crash down around him. He took a deep breath, his face etched with guilt and sorrow. He faltered, trying to find the right words, but there was no easy way to explain the life he had led. "I'm not Jake Miller. I'm Jack Morrison." Emma's eyes widened in shock as the words hit her like a freight train. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "You're Jack Morrison, the billionaire? Why didn't you tell me?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "I wanted to be someone else. I wanted to know if anyone could love me for who I am, not for the money, not for the fame." He paused, his voice breaking. "I wanted to escape everything. But I never should have lied to you. I'm sorry, Emma. I didn't mean for it to get this far." Emma stood there, stunned. The man she had come to care for, The man she had trusted had been living a lie. The betrayal she felt was overwhelming. She had given him her heart, and he had taken it, only to break it with the truth. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she had just heard. She took a step back, her eyes filled with a mix of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. "Everything we had was a lie?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "You pretended to be someone you're not? For what? To see if I'd fall for you?" Jake nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I never meant to hurt you, Emma. I thought I could keep the truth from you, but I was wrong. I was scared, okay? Scared of losing everything. Of losing you." Emma's hands clenched into fists at her sides as she fought back tears. "Wah, you should have told me the truth from the beginning. You should have been honest with me. You don't get to play with people's lives like this, Jake. You don't get to use me as a test for your own insecurities." Before Jake could respond, they both heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Robert stepped out, his face red with anger, and Emma's heart sank. She knew what was coming next. "I know everything, Emma," Robert said, his voice cold. "This man has been lying to you. He's not who he says he is." He turned to Jake, his voice low but filled with fury. "You've deceived my daughter. You've played with her emotions, and I'm not going to stand for it." Emma stood frozen, caught in the whirlwind of emotions that were now threatening to tear her apart. Jake's lies, Robert's fury, and her own shattered trust. It was too much to process. She looked at Jake one last time, her heart heavy with the weight of everything he had hidden from her. "I don't know who you are anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." And with that, Emma turned and walked away, leaving Jake standing in the midst of his shattered world. Emma stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, as the weight of Jake's confession sank in. The world around her felt like it was spinning out of control, and the pain in her chest was nearly unbearable. She had trusted him. She had given him pieces of herself. She had sworn never to give again. And now, it felt like everything had been a lie. Every moment, every laugh, every tender look they had shared, it was all tainted by the truth. "Oh, can I trust you now?" Emma's voice cracked, the anger and hurt clear in her words. Everything was a lie. "You've been lying to me the whole time. You weren't who you said you were, and now I don't know what to believe." Jake's heart sank as he saw the devastation in her eyes. "No, Emma, please, it's not like that," he said desperately, his voice shaky as he reached out to her, trying to close the distance between them. "What I feel for you is real. Everything I've said to you, my feelings for you, those were never a lie." He paused, his throat tight. "The rest of it, the disguise, the fake life, I only did that because I was afraid. I wanted to know if you could love me for me, not for the man I've been pretending to be." Emma recoiled from him, her face a mixture of disbelief and fury. "So what? You were testing me? You lied, manipulated me, and played games with my emotions just to see if I'd fall for you, and now you expect me to believe that your feelings were real? How am I supposed to trust anything you say after this?" Her voice was cold now, each word cutting through Jake like a knife. She had never felt more betrayed in her life. "How could you think that was okay, to use me like this? You've taken everything I believed and turned it into something that's just empty." Jake's hands trembled as he tried to make sense of his actions, the words slipping out in a rush, almost as if he was trying to convince himself, as much as he was trying to convince her. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought if I could prove to myself that someone could love me, without the wealth, without the fame, then maybe I could finally have something real. But I should have told you the truth. I should have trusted you from the beginning, and I'm sorry. I know I've ruined everything." Emma shook her head, stepping back. Her gaze turned cold, and the warmth she had once felt toward him was gone, replaced by an icy distance. "I need time, Jake. I need time to think about all of this. to figure out if I can even look at you the same way again." Her voice was steady, though the tremor of heartbreak still lingered beneath. She turned away from him, her heart in pieces as she walked toward the door, each step feeling like a weight that kept her moving away from him. The truth had shattered everything they had built, and now there was nothing left but the wreckage. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Jake," she whispered as she stepped outside, leaving him standing alone, consumed by regret and the crushing reality that his lies had cost him the one person he had truly cared for. The day of the press conference had finally arrived, and Jake stood backstage, his palms sweaty, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth he was about to reveal. This was the moment where he could no longer hide behind the facade he had built. It was time to admit his mistakes, publicly, to the people he had deceived, to the woman he had hurt, and to himself. As the cameras flashed and the reporters gathered, Jake stepped out to face the crowd. He could feel the eyes of Oakridge's residents on him, their expectations and judgment all too clear. It was a far cry from the quiet life he had once imagined in this small town. He stood at the podium, took a deep breath, and looked out at the sea of faces before him. The silence was deafening. "I stand before you today," Jake began, his voice steady but filled with regret, "to admit that I have made terrible mistakes. I have lied, manipulated, and deceived the very people I came to care about. I allowed my fear and insecurities to drive me to do things I can never undo, and for that, I am deeply sorry." The weight of his words hung in the air. He could feel the tension in the room, the skepticism from the people who had believed in him when he had first arrived in Oakridge. But he couldn't stop now. This was the truth, no matter how hard it was to say. "I came here under a false identity. Jake Miller was a name I created to hide from my own past. I pretended to be someone I wasn't because I wanted to know if someone could love me for who I really am. What I learned through this experiment is that true wealth isn't measured by money. It's measured by the people we care about and who care about us. And I have been selfish. I used my wealth and my deception to test that without ever considering the damage it would cause. I was wrong, and for that, I truly apologize." As he spoke, the crowd remained silent, processing his words. But then, something began to shift. He could see the softening expressions on the faces in the crowd, the cautious glimmers of understanding in their eyes. They had witnessed his sincerity, and slowly, they began to warm to him again. Jake continued, his voice more confident now, as the enormity of his decision to come clean fully settled on him. "I'm not proud of what I've done. I've hurt people, Emma especially, and I have a long way to go to earn back your trust. But I'm committed to making things right, to prove that I'm not the person I've been pretending to be." He paused, gathering his thoughts, before making his promise. "I have decided to use a significant portion of my fortune to help communities like Oakridge, places that deserve better, places where people matter more than money. I will dedicate myself to creating opportunities, to giving back in ways that truly make a difference." The words were out now, and Jake felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't enough to undo the damage he had caused, but it was a start. The crowd was reacting now, slowly, with a mix of disbelief, admiration, and cautious hope. He could hear murmurs of support, of people starting to believe that his words were more than just empty promises. They were seeing the change in him. "I know this will take time," Jake added, his voice quieter now, "but I am committed to earning back your trust. I know I can never fully make up for what I've done, but I promise to do everything in my power to be better, for all of you." As he finished, the room erupted in a mix of applause and hesitant claps. Jake looked out at the crowd, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to walk it. He had made his confession, admitted his mistakes, and was ready to change. The residents of Oakridge, those who had once questioned his sincerity, now saw him for what he truly was, a man willing to take responsibility and make amends. The press conference was over, but the real work was just beginning. As Jake walked off the stage, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had made the first step toward redemption, and although the future was uncertain, he knew one thing for sure. It was his actions from now on that would define him, and he was determined to prove that the man he wanted to be was not the man he had been. Emma sat in her small living room, the soft light of the evening filtering through the window. Her mind was racing with thoughts of Jack Morrison, the billionaire who had once seemed like the ultimate deception. She had been so angry, so hurt by his lies, but as she reflected on his public confession, something inside her had begun to shift. The sincerity in his voice, the depth of his regret. It was hard to ignore. The anger that had once consumed her was now mingled with confusion, and beneath it all, a reluctant understanding. Could he really be the man he said he was now? Could she let go of the betrayal and allow herself to believe in him again? Over the past few days, Emma had been quietly digging into Jack's past, not to uncover more lies, but to understand the full picture. She started looking into the philanthropic work Jack had been involved in, the donations to orphanages, educational programs, and clean energy projects that he had quietly supported over the years. These weren't publicized, weren't part of the lavish headlines that followed his every move as a businessman. Instead, they were projects he had worked on in the shadows, making a difference in communities without expecting anything in return. He's not just a billionaire, Emma thought to herself as she read through report after report on the charitable initiatives Jack had funded. He's done so much good that I never knew about. She sat back, overwhelmed with the complexity of the man she had come to love. The more she learned, the more her heart softened, but doubts still lingered. Could she truly forgive him? Could she let herself love him again after everything he had put her through? Finally, after much soul-searching, Emma knew what she had to do. She had to face Jack. Face him and decide for herself if she could believe in the man he was now, not the man who had deceived her before. She drove to his house, her heart racing with both anticipation and fear. When she arrived, Jack was standing outside, as if he had been waiting for her. He looked at her, his expression both hopeful and apprehensive. "Emma," he said softly, his voice filled with both longing and regret. "I didn't expect you to come back. I understand if you can't forgive me, but I'm still here, ready to do whatever it takes." Emma took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been through so much in such a short time, and now, standing before him, she realized just how much she had come to care for him. She stepped forward, her eyes locking with his, her voice steady as she spoke. "I see the man you are now," Emma said, her words full of both emotion and determination. "I see the truth in you, the man who has worked to make a difference, the man who has changed. I see the man who truly loves me, not the one who deceived me." Jack's face softened as he heard her words, and for a moment, it felt like the weight of everything that had happened between them began to lift. Emma stepped closer, her heart opening once more to the possibility of a future together. She had spent so much time being angry, being hurt by the past, but now she realized that love was about giving someone a chance to be better, to grow. "I want to believe in us again, Jake," she continued, her voice softening. "I want to give us a second chance, but this time it has to be built on trust. I need to know that who you are now is who you really are, no more secrets." Jack nodded, his eyes full of gratitude and promise. "I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I am the man you deserve, Emma. I know I can't change the past, but I can be the man you can trust moving forward." And with that, Emma felt a spark of hope begin to bloom in her heart. Maybe they couldn't erase the pain of the past, but together they could build something new, something real. She reached out, taking Jack's hand in hers, the gesture a silent promise between them both. They were starting over, with honesty and vulnerability leading the way. As they stood there, hand in hand, Emma knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter for them. There would still be challenges ahead, still moments of doubt and hesitation, but she was ready to give them a chance, to give their love a chance. Because in the end, love wasn't about perfection. It was about growth, forgiveness, and the courage to start over. After the whirlwind of emotions and revelations, Jake and Emma had found their way back to each other, stronger than ever. Together, they decided to create the New Dawn Foundation, a charity aimed at bringing real change to Oakridge and surrounding communities. They used their combined resources to support local businesses, improve schools, and create new opportunities for people who had long struggled with limited options. The foundation quickly became a beacon of hope for many, and Oakridge began to see the fruits of their efforts. New businesses opened their doors, schools received much-needed renovations, and there was a renewed sense of pride within the community. People who had once been skeptical of Jake's intentions now saw the impact of his actions. The town was beginning to flourish, with a sense of unity and growth that hadn't been felt in years. The transformation was more than just financial. It was emotional, too. People who had been downtrodden and unsure now had a reason to believe in something better. As the foundation grew, Jake found himself reflecting on how far he had come and how his past decisions had shaped this new chapter in his life. But there was still one person who needed to make amends, the person who had been his closest friend, his confidant, and the one who had helped him maintain his facade for so long: Tom. One day, after an intense round of meetings for the foundation, Tom approached Jake, his expression serious. Jake could see the sincerity in his eyes, something he hadn't seen before. Tom, once motivated by power and control, had come to realize the mistakes he had made in the past. "Jake," Tom began, his voice low but filled with emotion. "I know I've done a lot of wrong. I've manipulated situations, hurt people, including you. I see what you've done with the foundation, how you've turned things around for Oakridge, and I want to be a part of that. I want to change, and I want to help." Jake studied him for a moment, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. He remembered all the times Tom had encouraged him to embrace his wealth and power for personal gain, rather than using it for good. But this was different. Tom wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was offering something more: his help. "You've always been my friend, Tom," Jake said, his voice steady but kind. "If you want to start over, to make things right, then you need to work with us. This foundation is about change, and that includes you too." Tom's eyes softened as he nodded, his face showing genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Jake. Thank you for giving me this chance. I won't let you down. I want to make things right. I want to help." It was a turning point for Tom. For the first time in his life, he was choosing to work towards something meaningful rather than self-interest. And with that, he joined the New Dawn Foundation, helping to fund even more projects that would continue to elevate Oakridge and the surrounding areas. As the foundation blossomed, so did Jake and Emma's relationship. They had faced the darkest of times together, and now they were ready to celebrate the light. The day of their wedding arrived, and Oakridge's main square was transformed into a beautiful, magical venue. The entire community gathered around them, showing their love and support. The ceremony was simple yet filled with profound meaning, surrounded by the people who had seen their journey and who now shared in their happiness. Under a canopy of twinkling lights, with the soft hum of music in the background, Jake took Emma's hand and looked into her eyes. His voice was steady but filled with deep emotion as he spoke his vows. "I'm not Jack Morrison, the billionaire. I'm Jake Miller, the man who loves you, Emma. All of my wealth, all of my past, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I found you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that my love for you is real." Emma's eyes welled with tears as she gazed at him, her heart full. "I love you, Jake," she said, her voice filled with certainty. "Not because of your money, not because of who you were, but because of who you are. I love you because of the heart that you have and the way you've changed." As they exchanged rings and promises, the crowd cheered, but for Jake and Emma, the world around them faded away. It was just the two of them, ready to face the future together, united in love and purpose. The wedding marked not only a new chapter in their personal lives, but also the continuation of their journey to make the world around them a better place. They had learned the hard way that true happiness didn't come from wealth, but from the people we love and the change we create in the world. Together, Jake and Emma would continue to build a future full of hope, love, and a commitment to helping others. Years passed and Oakridge flourished, its once quiet streets now alive with thriving businesses, improved schools, and a renewed sense of hope. The New Dawn Foundation, fueled by Jake, Emma, and Tom's dedication, expanded its reach, touching not only Oakridge but neighboring towns as well. The legacy of their work stretched far beyond the projects they had funded. It was about the lives they had changed, the people they had helped, and the communities they had transformed. Jake and Emma, now with two children of their own, William and Lily, watched as their little ones grew, teaching them the values of love, compassion, and community. Their home was filled with laughter, joy, and the lessons they had learned through their struggles. Together, they nurtured their children's hearts, hoping they would carry the torch of kindness and generosity into the world. Tom, a changed man, worked alongside them, his dedication to the foundation proving that redemption was not just a hope but a possibility. The trio, once driven by personal ambition, now found purpose in making the world a better place. Their story became one not of wealth, but of love's power to heal, change, and create a lasting impact. And as Oakridge continued to thrive, the legacy of their journey remained, a reminder that true wealth lies not in what we have, but in what we give.